We will shortly be hearing from Adeline Winshaw, who behind the scenes, and many of you will have seen her popping up at numerous events, does an enormous amount of heavy lifting to make sure that all of our key partners understand what is required to make sure that our region can thrive and succeed by being able to train and recruit the next generation of workforce. We'll also, though, be hearing from Mike Spicer and Hannah Lazarus, who are our experts. They have done an amazing job to look at some of the data 12 months on since the Local Skills Improvement Plan was approved by the Secretary of State for Education to help us ascertain what has changed in the local landscape. But more importantly today, how can you, our key stakeholders, also play your part to make sure that together we work as a team for the growth and success of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. In terms of housekeeping, as I say, we are recording this session. We will just edit it down to the overview from Adeline, Mike and Hannah, because towards the end of the session, there will be the chance to contribute via the Q&A and through the chats that you're able to share your comments and thoughts. But please do not fear, we will edit those contributions out, but we feel that it's really important that we continue to have a deck of information for colleagues who have not been able to attend. Now, why is this so important to us? It's really key because for many years now, we've faced a lot of volatility across the economic backdrop. We've had Brexit, a pandemic, we've had a Suez Canal being blocked, but consistently, it's always about recruiting, retaining skills. That is always the number one challenge for our employers regionally. Therefore, to make sure that we can thrive and succeed and give, especially those sectors that could give us a strategic edge across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, it's really important that we're able to bring together, as I say, our key educators, our local authority colleagues, and also to make sure that our business community all come together to share insight, to talk about that long-term consistent view so that we're all able to take the action to enable that future growth. So that's enough from me. It's now my pleasure to introduce Adeline, who will provide just some more detailed context in terms of the Local Skills Improvement Plan. Where have we been? But more importantly, why are we here today? And what does the road forwards look like? So good morning, Adeline. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, as Charlotte's referenced, I'll just give a brief recap, really. I'm mindful some of you will be very, very familiar with the LSIP already, but for those of you who are not, just want to give a bit of background, really. So the Local Skills Improvement Plan is Department for Education funded project that's been rolled out across England and Wales, with each region having a employer representative body. For Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, that's us as the Chamber of Commerce, to effectively lead the sort of employer voice on the skills shortages, helping to try and develop a plan as part of a wider process that looks to help align education and training provision and the support available to employers with the needs of the employers, making sure that they have the sort of workforce with the skills they need to maintain and grow their businesses. So that's the sort of concept, and as I say, there is a plan, and the Local Skills Improvement Plan was developed in consultation with employers and other stakeholders, including local authorities and education training providers themselves. That was approved, and over the last year, a wide range of stakeholders, including, say, education training providers, have been working really hard to look to implement some of those recommendations and changes, with us, the Chamber, as the employer representative body, sort of stepping in to help facilitate, support that action, but as well as capture the kind of impact and the progress that is being made. So we're at a place now where, again, around this time last year, we had obviously in-depth sort of consultation with employers about their needs. But as part of our role, ongoing, we're looking to also continue to understand employers' skills gaps, as well as obviously the sort of changes and challenges that they're facing. So as part of that, we're looking at various different methods of gathering that insight, direct with employers, such as there's a manufacturing group where we'll be talking to sort of managing directors of key employers across the region next week, and other sector related forums to understand the challenges, but also we want to supplement that with looking at the sort of analytics, the labour market information, as well as taking on feedback from our stakeholders. So there's a piece that we're doing, as I say, to continue to monitor those skills needs. But this is also, I think, a useful conversation later down the end with the sort of question, Q&A that we can do to help, again, share some of those insights with stakeholders such as yourselves to make sure that we're taking a one region approach and that this isn't sort of isolated to individuals or specific plans, but that actually we're continuing to come together to talk about skills needs in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and how we can support employers have the workforce they need. So to say, sort of, this is one of the activities we're doing, and as we're conducting that sort of regular labour market analysis, bringing together wider stakeholder insights as well, we'll be looking to run these sessions regularly. So the next one will be on the 9th of September at the same time, and we'll put a link in the chat later on for you to book onto that one if you'd like to attend. But we're also, as I say, looking at sort of beyond the labour market sort of analysis that we'll be talking through today. We're looking at sort of monitoring and bringing together all the progress that's been made towards the LSIP recommendations. So we'll have our annual report next month, and there's activities that have been ongoing, such as our sort of creation of an information hub to help, again, signpost education providers to the, employers to the education training providers and other support that they might need to access. So that's new, that's been launched last week and is available on our website to have a look. So welcome any feedback on that as well. But before I'll sort of leave the summary there and we'll get on to, as I say, talking about some of this qualitative sort of information, bringing that together with the insights that Mike and Hannah have been pulling together, labour market and other data. And we'll just welcome putting questions in the sort of question and answer function that you should have in Zoom, and we'll come back later in the session to talk about those.
Thanks, guys. So I think, Adeline, you've covered kind of the background to the report and the LSIP process, so I won't dwell on that. But I will start by, if you like, putting up a few health checks and health warnings, I should say, before we get into the main meat of the presentation. The first is that this isn't the full report, and this is a presentation of the report. And the report that Hannah and I have worked on, it includes a lot of local detail that is going to be relevant to local districts, different parts of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, different education groups and providers. So I do, that will be circulated, I know. So, if you're looking for very specific bits of information and data, do please consult the report. Also, the presentation that we've got here today, we'll run through it at a fair clip, but I recognise we probably won't get through every single, chart and table that we would like to, but it will be circulated. So you will have the chance to look through it at your leisure later on. I should also say that always where possible, we've tried to use the most recent information available. But as you may know, that is more recent in some areas than others. So, for example, we can have pretty much up to the minute information about stuff that's posted on job sites. That's pretty fresh. But stuff that relates to, say, growth in the population or those kind of broader metrics of labour market are often less recent than that. So we'll always strive to provide the most recent data that we can, but there's a health warning that there's stuff that we would, of course, have loved to have included that we can't, simply because it's not available. And just finally, before I get into it, and as kind of reinforcing Adeline's point, is that data can only get you so far. You can have much more in-depth conversations with individual employers or individual FE providers, for instance, and that is, of course, part of the LSIP process, part of the monitoring process. And we see that this report as a complement to that, and as part of a broader set of LSIP materials that are relevant to keeping the LSIP fresh and thinking about how it might be refreshed in the future. So the way Hannah and I are going to play this is we're going to, for each of the sections of the report, we'll set out some key messages, your kind of takeaway messages, and they'll be on a single slide, so you can print them off and put them in your pocket, and you'll have them to hand. And then we'll touch on, sort of one or two charts for each of those areas, statistics that kind of make that give it a bit more colour. And then at the end of that, we'll have time to reflect on what we've presented. We'll have time for questions and comments. And then what we're going to do is set out some of the, if you like, the outstanding questions and areas for insight that we have identified through the report. And it'd be great to discuss those with you, and some of the questions that it raises about skills planning and and what we as a community of providers and employer representatives can do to understand or even fix those issues. So that's kind of how we'll set it out. But without any further ado, if I had to boil the report down into 3 points, here's broadly what they would be. Incredibly reductive, I know, but always good to have 3 key messages. So the first one really relates to labour market participation. And what we can say from the data is that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough as a whole actually compares quite well to national averages and national metrics when it comes to the performance of the labour market. There are some significant differences across the patch. There are definitely certain things in certain districts that we'll touch on in more detail. But if you take a step back, it performs quite well. You may have heard that we've got an issue in the UK and England in particular around falling rates of labour market participation, so people falling out of the workforce. That isn't quite the issue here that it is in some other parts of the country, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. There are some specific areas around the labour market that concern us. We're a little bit concerned about deteriorating metrics for Fenland in particular within our patch, and also some declining jobs numbers in particular professions that are relevant to our LSIP ambitions and our broader economic ambitions. So we'll touch on those in a bit more detail. In terms of qualification and training, our part of the world is becoming more qualified, we can say that for sure. But there are inequalities that remain across districts. And in particular, we're seeing a widening of performance between those who receive free school meals and those who do not. So even within this picture, which is broadly a good picture, we're seeing some widening inequalities, and those concern us. And we've seen an enrolment in higher education that has surged even as those divides grow. We've seen apprenticeship numbers increase, but these have been driven by higher level achievements, which potentially is more of a reflection of the way the system is funded than anything else. So we'll come back to that later. And then just finally, this kind of third area around skills gaps. There are particular areas of the economy where we struggle to recruit in this part of the world. We definitely struggle to recruit in care, and skills gaps are at their highest in hospitality and information technology. We've seen job postings for green skills in particular have surged, but they haven't surged for digital skills, despite the importance of digital to the economy. And there's some interesting possibilities for why that might be, in particular to do with a lessening of churn within digital employers, those who employ people in digital roles. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail as we go through the presentation. So just taking each section in turn, and I'll introduce it and then hand over to Hannah for a bit more detail. But if we start with some key messages around Cambridge and Peterborough's demographics, labour market participation, and unemployment. As I said, its labour market, although it's cooled, has remained strong, particularly if you compare it to other parts of the country. Employment among our residents fell slightly last year, but it still remained at a near record rate. And the fall in employed people across our area was driven by a few factors. In particular, it was driven by a fall in employment in certain parts of our region, in Fenland, East Cambridgeshire and Cambridge, a fall in employment among certain demographics, a fall in employment in particular sectors and job roles. But if you look at unemployment, which, although it's rose to its highest level in a number of years, economic inactivity, that is, absence from the labour market, has fallen to a record low, which again is something that is quite the contrast really with the national picture. There's a lot of talk in the media, particularly about that as an issue. It's not really as much of an issue here if you take Cambridge and Peterborough as a whole. But when you combine that rise in unemployment, but fall in economic activity, the rate of worklessness is at a record low. However, there's some flies in the ointment there. We know that the share of working age people who are inactive due to long-term sickness is at a record high, in common with other places in the country, and the absence from the labour market increased in Fenland and in East Cambridgeshire. So I'll leave it at that point, Hannah, but you're going to give us a bit more detail, I know. So if I move it on to your slide.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. So this chart shows the reasons for economic inactivity. So this is the percentage of 16 to 64-year-olds who are out of work and not looking for work. So it's kind of different to unemployment, which is being out of work and actively seeking work. So these are people that have completely withdrawn from the labour market. So as Mike mentioned, economic inactivity is at a record low, so 17.1% of the working age population. So that's around 1 in 6 people. So there are many reasons for being economically inactive. So you can see it 20 years ago in 2004. So this dark blue line, the key reason for economic inactivity was looking after the family or home. And this has fallen since 2017 in line with the introduction of 30 hours of funded childcare for eligible parents. So this seems to have worked well to get parents to get into or remain in work. And inactivity for this reason is now at a record low. Inactivity due to being retired before the age of 65. So this is the dark orange line near the bottom. So this has been reducing for almost 20 years. And this has been in line with the increase in the state pension age for women. So there are now more women aged 60 to 64 in employment, and inactivity due to retirement before the age of 65 is also now at a record low. We've got the mid blue line here near the top. This is inactivity due to being a student, and this is generally regarded as being a good thing. And this is now the top reason for economic inactivity. You can see this increased sharply in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, but it's now fallen back to long-term average levels. And then we have the one we're concerned about. So this light orange line, this is inactivity due to long-term sickness. So this has been on the rise since 2020, since the pandemic. It's now at a record high. So 5% or 1 in 20 working age adults are now economically inactive due to being long-term sick. And this is also a national trend. And there are some national data on types of conditions causing inactivity due to poor health. And this shows that depression and anxiety is the top reason for health-based inactivity, and also the health condition that's increased most over the past 4 years in terms of causes of inactivity.
Thanks, Hannah. So moving on to the next section of our report, which concerns jobs, occupations, vacancies, so their number and composition. We've seen the number of jobs across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It fell for the second consecutive year in 2022. And although there was a sort of mixed performance across the area, so we had some growth in job numbers in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but they were offset by falls elsewhere, especially in Fenland. And jobs density, so that's the number of jobs per resident in the area, although that remained the same over that period, it did fall sharply in Fenland. So, you know, as I said at the beginning, there are certain things that we're concerned about within this broader picture, and definitely some of those metrics relating to Fenland do concern us a bit. And so if we look at sectors rather than geographies, one of the interesting findings of the report is that if you look at the 4 growth sectors that are identified within the economic development strategies of the Combined Authority and others, and are identified within the LSIP, so that's advanced manufacturing materials, digital, technology, we've got agri-tech, life sciences. What we're seeing is that jobs actually fell in advanced manufacturing and materials and digital and IT in the latest year for which we have local data for those sectors. But they did increase for agri-tech and life sciences, but even there, the growth rates for those were lower than what we saw in England as a whole. Some kind of factoids about the economy and recruitment. So the NHS, it probably won't surprise you to know remains, as it has done for some years, the area's biggest recruiter. So it is the sort of the biggest. It's one of the biggest and most significant employers in our part of the world, as it is in many others. Programmers and software development professionals continue to be the most in-demand occupation, even if we haven't seen a surge in the number of job postings as a whole for the digital sector. And then when we look about kind of what are the most in-demand specialist skills within job postings, well, they're project management and communications, which remains today, as it has done for some years, the most in demand of the kind of cross-cutting skills. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in another part of the presentation. But Hannah, you're going to take us through some more detail.
Yeah, okay, so here's a chart on jobs in growth sectors, which Mike's already touched on. So Cambridgeshire and Peterborough has 4 priority growth sectors listed in the identified in combined authority strategies and recognised within the LSIP. So advanced manufacturing, agri-tech, digital IT and life sciences. So jobs data suggests they didn't perform particularly well in jobs terms, at least in 2022. So for advanced manufacturing, the lighter blue line, jobs fell by 3,000 or by 12.5%, and this was driven by a variety of engineering jobs. However, GVA data just does suggest that architecture and engineering activities, GVA, increased in 2022, despite this fall in jobs. Digital and IT, so the light orange line, jobs fell by 2,000 or 7.1%, and this was driven by falls in computer consultancy activities and computer programming activities. Although again, GVA data suggests that computer programming and consultancies activities, GVA, increased in 2022, although this wasn't matched by an increase in employment. We have agri-tech jobs, so the dark blue line at the top. So jobs increased by 1,000, but the growth rate at 3.1% was below the England average of 5.6%. And life sciences jobs, the dark orange line at the bottom. So jobs increased by 1,000, but again, the growth rate at 4.8% was below the national rate of 7.4%. And we can also see here that agri-tech and life sciences jobs fell in 2020. And while they've since increased, they are still below their 2019 levels. So overall growth sectors seem to be experiencing some challenges in terms of their employment levels.
Great. So another section of our report related to recruitment difficulties and skill shortages. So just 3 key points before I hand back to Hannah to go into a bit more detail. We know that recruitment difficulties have increased considerably between 2019 and 2022, and there's a number of sources that we can draw on for that, including the quarterly economic survey that the Chamber puts out. But they have since eased a bit, which is consistent with an increase in the labour supply, as increased unemployment and reduced absences from the labour market, and a reduction in job vacancies. Our jobs posting data, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, is up to date. It's pretty fresh. Indicate that recruitment difficulties are highest for care workers and home carers. So the care profession, the sector, is really experiencing recruitment difficulties at the moment, as it has for a while now. We haven't seen much of a change in the incidence of skills gaps. That is, workers that are deemed by their employers not to be fully proficient in a skill over the 3 years to 2022. But we know that they're highest in information and communication and hotels and restaurants. So, Hannah, if I ask you to go through the next slide.
Okay, so this shows the results from the last 2 employer skills surveys in 2019 and 2022, and this shows that recruitment difficulties increased sharply during this period. So with 65% of employers experiencing at least one hard-to-fill vacancy in 2022, up from 41% in 2019. And this is in line with other data showing a surge in vacancies around 2021, 2022, after the peak of pandemic, and this wasn't matched by an increase in the number of people looking for work or looking to change roles. So at this time, it was harder for employers to fill their vacancies. However, vacancies data suggests that recruitment difficulties have eased since then. So, for instance, the average time taken to fill a vacancy has fallen from a peak of around 35 days in mid-2021 to 24 days in the 6 months to March 2024. However, as Mike mentioned, the length of time taken to fill a vacancy does vary between occupations. So among the top 50 occupations in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, vacancies are taking longest to fill for care workers and home carers at 29 days. And this is of concern, particularly because they're projected to be one of the fastest growing occupations between now and 2035, but they're already, posts for these jobs are already hard to fill.
Thanks, Hannah. So in terms of participation in education and training, apprenticeships, entertainment, so really directly relevant to the substance of the LSIP. Here are some sort of key findings really for the last quarter. So we still see quite a significant disparity in young people's qualifications attainment across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So some big differences between districts. So Fenland has notably low attainment among 16, 19-year-olds. In fact, the GCSE attainment 8 score is the 11th lowest of 300 local authority areas in England. So, that's some quite big differences there. Participation overall in education and training among 16 and 17-year-olds is now slightly above the national average, while participation at 19 in higher education is slightly below, despite increasing recently to a record late. Some other bits of information that'd be good to sort of quickly touch on. Apprenticeship achievements have increased, but this has been driven by a kind of strong rise in higher level apprenticeship achievements. So those things that are skewed towards kind of high level training for those at senior levels of organizations in those kind of senior level skills around management and so on. And the highest numbers in absolute terms that we see in our part of the world are achieved at Cambridge Regional College, ARU, and Inspire Education Group facilities. In terms of employer training, we know that this has unfortunately reduced to record low levels, particularly in the areas related to training for new technology, which is a bit concerning. And although off-the-job training is low, online training has increased in popularity during this time among those providing training. Hannah, if I can get you on to 28.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so a big challenge for a local skills improvement plan is that employer training has reduced to a record low in 2022. 62% of establishments provided training for their employees, and this was down from 73% in 2013. This reduction is also a national trend, but you can see it's fallen more sharply in Cambridge and Peterborough than across England. And of those providing training, new technology training decreased the most. So from 49% of those providing training in 2019 to 44% in 2022, which is unexpected given that employer demand for digital skills is said to be increasing. And there could be a number of reasons for this. The Employer Skills Survey doesn't give those reasons, but reasons could be insufficient provision across the area, employers not knowing where to find that provision, perhaps technological change, difficulty keeping up this and creating long-term skills plans, or perhaps cost of training, but we're not quite sure what the causes of that reduction in new technology training. And if we can go on to slide 29, Mike, as well, quickly. So that off-the-job training is now much less popular than on-the-job training. So the share of establishments providing off-the-job training and on-the-job training has reduced, but it's reduced more for off-the-job training. You can see in 2013, off-the-job training was slightly more popular than on-the-job training, but by 2022, it's significantly less common. So it shows that employers are less likely to take employees out of their day-to-day work for training activities. But in contrast, we've seen an increase in online learning. So from 43% of establishments providing training in 2015 to 67% in 2022.
Thanks, Hannah. So within the report, we have a spotlight on 3 kind of skill areas, if you like, and that's green skills, digital skills, and soft skills. So there are sections in the report on each of those. So we'll just say a little bit about each. That'll take us towards the end of the presentation. So if we start with digital skills and jobs, we know that now about 1 in 11 people working across our region are employed in digital occupations. It's not necessarily digital employers or companies within technology, but within digital occupations. And digital employment rates are highest in South Cambridgeshire, Cambridge, and Peterborough, and lowest in the rural fens. We know that the number of digital workers has increased by over 50% over the past 5 years, against a 1% fall in employment across the rest of the labour market. And digital employment is growing at its fastest in East Cambridge and Fenland and Peterborough. So when we, that perhaps reflects the fact that there's more scope perhaps for growth, particularly in Fenland there, in that starting from a lower base. Programmers and software development professionals are the most in demand occupation in Cambridge and Peterborough, with the number of job postings being higher than any other occupation. And as I said there, digital skills, they're not confined to primarily digital employers or even to digital occupations. So we can say that they're now essential entry requirements for something like more than 4/5 of all job openings. So if you go through the way that jobs are described on job sites and in job ads, it's amazing how often digital skills feature there. It's essentially now a standard thing that you can expect to see within a job ad. And the most requested things that we do see across our part of the world, the job sites for jobs here, over the past 5 years have been Python, a programming language, Microsoft Excel, software engineering, Microsoft Office, and C++ and other coding language. So a mix of things that are more technical and more cross-cutting. Hannah, if I can hand over to you. Yeah.
Okay, so digital skills in highest demand. So we've looked at skills requested in job postings in Cambridge and Peterborough over the last 5 years and found that 17 of the 50 most requested specialised skills, so that's those highlighted here in blue, are digital skills. So with programming languages being some of the most requested, particularly Python, C++ and JavaScript, along with software engineering, computer science, data analysis and software development. And also 5 of the most requested common skills are digital skills. So those highlighted here in orange. So you can see that Microsoft Excel is the second most requested digital skill and also the most common digital skill, followed by Microsoft Office, computer literacy, Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft PowerPoint.
Excellent. So if we turn from digital skills to green skills, some interesting facts about our part of the world. So we know that 1/3 of people working in Cambridge and Peterborough are employed in occupations that will be affected by the transition to a green economy. And we kind of split that impact across 3 sort of different impact types, if you like. So there are occupations that will be in increased demand, but will require no significant change to worker requirements. So an example of that, for example, could be more people working in recycling plants. It could be, more people working in, professions like waste management or environmental management, where there are already established roles and professions, but where we're likely to see more demand for those kinds of jobs. Then there are existing occupations where you're likely to see changes to worker requirements. So an example of that might be electrical engineering. If you're an electrician, you're likely to see an increase in demand because of the moves to electrify parts of the economy that previously weren't, such as in transport. But that requires different technical skills. Plumbing would be another example of that. As we plumbing and heating engineers. They already exist, of course, but they're likely to see changing requirements over the years. And then there are those jobs that are just entirely new and come about because of the transition and weren't there in the past. And who knows exactly what they will be. They come about as the economy changes. But we're already starting to see, for example, the growth in very niche consultancy type roles within the green sector, so advising on managing the transition if you're an employer, for example, or a household. So those are the kind of three routes to impact, if you like, and how it might manifest itself in the job market. But based on what we know, we can say that the sectors with the highest shares of employment in green occupations are largely what you might call kind of blue collar sectors. So construction, for example, would be a good example of that. But we also have high shares of employment in professional services, scientific and technical activities, manufacturing, transport, and so on. So it really does affect quite a lot of the economy. If you look at job postings, the information that we see on job sites for jobs in our part of the world and that request specialist green skills, those job postings have more than doubled over the past 5 years. Waste management has been by far the most requested of the green skills, followed by water treatment, wastewater ecology. And as with so many other parts of the economy, green jobs, they don't just, they're not a completely discrete area of competence. If you're working in a green role, you need other types of skills as well to do your job. So green jobs require a range of non-green skills as well. So project management, as an example of that. Hannah, I'll move you on to the detail.
Yeah, okay, so what are the most requested green skills within jobs? So waste management has been by far the top green requested skill within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough jobs postings over the past 5 years. And this table here shows the top green skills requested in job postings across the 6 local authority areas. And it shows that waste management, environment, health and safety, and ISO 14000 series featured within the top green requested skills in job postings in all 6 areas. Electric vehicles, environmental resource management, renewable energy and wastewater featured within the top green skills in at least 4 areas. And some skills are specific to certain areas, such as environmental protocols, so knowledge of those international agreements in Cambridge, geographic information systems in East Cambridgeshire, plastic recycling and waste packaging in Finland, and waste collection in South Cambridgeshire.
Thanks, Hannah. And then soft skills, the last of the 3 that I spoke about before, completing the triangle there. So the most requested skills of all in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough are all soft skills. If you look across job postings over the past 5 years and rank the skills that are included in there by frequency, then the top 8 skills requested were all what you might categorize as soft skills. And they accounted for 17 of the top 25. So soft skills are, you can expect them to be in a job ad for sure, and they are in most job ads. Communication is by far the most requested of those soft skills or cross-cutting skills, followed by management, customer service, sales, and being detail-oriented, which you might think is it's a soft skill, because it's also a personal characteristic as well, depending on your point of view. But you can categorize soft skills into 5 categories, and we do that within the report. Analytical, creative skills, interpersonal skills, self-management skills, leadership skills, and knowledge transfer skills. So those are the most requested soft skills in Cambridge and Peterborough, and how you can cut them in those 5 different ways. Hannah, you've got a bit of detail before I bring the data bit of the session to a close.
Yeah, okay, so this chart shows the top skills requested in job postings across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough over the past 5 years. So soft skills are those in blue. And this shows that the top 8 skills requested among candidates are all soft skills, with communication being by far the most requested skill and being requested 4 times more frequently than the most requested specialist skill. So those are in orange, so project management being the top requested specialist skill. And this ties in with other research which suggests that soft skills are the most important skills within the labour market. And this is because they're relevant to all job roles, whereas specialist skills are confined to certain occupations. And after communication, we then have management, customer service, sales, detailed orientated, planning, research, and leadership being the most important skills in job postings across the area.
What we did in the report was draw together what we're calling a set of forward priorities for insight. So, of course, when you do this kind of research, it raises questions as well as answers them. It raises kind of areas of further insight that we'd like to explore. So within the report, what we've done is we've identified 8 areas in particular that we think, you know, is really relevant to future skills planning, and where we'd really like to focus conversations with employers, with education providers, with our stakeholders and partners within the delivery of skills and education. So I put them in the 8 up on the screen, and what I'll do is I'll just quickly run through them, and then we can take each in turn and say a little bit more about them, and then draw for breath after each of those, if that's okay. So I'll start off with a summary, and then we'll go into a bit more detail, and Hannah and I will take it in turns to go through the detail of each. But the 8 that we kind of focused on, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but they really were the ones that jumped out at us, were firstly the decline in occupational employment relevant to education and training provision. So, you know, we have seen an absolute fall in the number of people working in education and training roles in our part of the world, and of course that has to be relevant to any kind of skills planning, because we're talking about the capacity to deliver. The second there is the impact on employers of rising inactivity that is due to long-term sickness. So within that picture of inactivity and the various different reasons that for it that Hannah set out, the numbers of people who are inactive due to long-term sickness has increased compared to some of the other reasons for inactivity. And that has real-world consequences for the employee-employer relationship, for access to employment, for the ability to retrain and participate in education. So we want to understand that in a bit more detail. The decline in the number of jobs across Cambridge and Peterborough's priority sectors for economic development. We showed within the presentation that we've seen a decline in numbers in several of the key priority sectors. Why is that? Is it a cyclical thing? Can we trace it back to individual, or can we trace it back to specific things that are specific to our part of the world, or is it part of a broader trend? Labour market exclusion and poor outcomes for young people in Finland. I think that came up as a theme across a number of the slides, and we want to understand that a bit better. We want to understand the decline in employer training and how it's reached record low levels, especially for instruction in new technology. That seems a bit counterintuitive with the explosion in different general purpose technologies like artificial intelligence. You'd expect perhaps it to be not the case, but why has that been there? Why has there been a decline, and what's the nature of it? We like to know a bit more about, connected to that, the likely impact on future digital skills demand from recent advances in AI and other industry developments. Although the LSIP is a relatively fresh document, even that over the last year we've seen huge strides in the application of AI across different business functions. So we've definitely got to keep an eye on that and what that means for the demand for training and the nature of training demands. We want to know a bit more about the detailed requirements behind the increased demand for green skills, and we want to understand a bit more about the shortage of care workers and whether there are things that are specific to our part of the world that go beyond the things we already know about for the country as a whole. So those are the kind of, if you like, the 8 areas that we identify. But within those, there's a bit more detail that we include. And it'd be good to just draw breath, as I say, after each of those so we can discuss them if everyone's got any comments they'd like to make. But the declines in occupation employment that's relevant to education and training provision. So teaching and educational professionals saw the second largest decline in numbers after elementary admin and service occupations. So 7,900 fewer last year than in 2022. We know that partly reflects some national trends in teachers leaving the profession after the pandemic, especially in primary schools. But what we want to understand through our Insight programme is any local factors that might be behind that decline, how it affects non-primary education and those bits of the education system that are kind of employer-facing, if you like, especially FE. And the prospects of future employment and any potential impact it might have on LSIP delivery. So the sorts of questions that we're interested in asking of employers are, are they seeing any evidence of that in trying to source people to carry out training courses? Are they seeing any impact in their ability to access training? Is that reflected in the training that they're doing? And also whether or not there are opportunities for employees to play a constructive role in addressing some of that. So, in some parts of the country, there's kind of active discussions, led by employer groups and others about how employers potentially can do joint appointments to the education sector and other models that allow employers sort of directly contribute to solving some of those shortages. For our partners who are working within the education and training sector, we'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to know, does this feel right where you are within the system, or what is going on? And if you are experiencing some of those shortages, what strategies are you employing to overcome those difficulties, and what kind of support would you like to see from employers? So those are the kind of the key things, I think. But Energy Academy in St Ives, and we have been able to recruit tutors to fill all of our vacancies. Is that you have been able to recruit, or you haven't? Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was. So you have been able to recruit tutors. This is what we're experiencing in FE. We need to attract skilled staff from industry to support training, but employers are very reluctant to engage. Any more thoughts on declines in occupational employment in teaching and training? Okay. What I'll do is I'll move on to the next slide, Hannah, because you're going to pick up specifically the issue around labour market participation and long-term sickness. I know, so we'll be able to address the question in the comments there.
Okay, so the impact on employers of rising inactivity due to long-term sickness. So we've talked about the share of working age people in Cambridge and Peterborough who are not participating in the labour market because of long-term sickness, and this is a record high of nearly 1 in 20. We've talked about ONS statistics showing that depression and anxiety is the most prominent health condition among those who are inactive, and this condition has also seen the biggest increase since 2019. So we'd like to explore with employers and providers how you've experienced this through impacts on recruitment and staff retention, strategies and mitigations, and the consequences for delivery of LSIP priorities. So questions for employers include, to what extent has long-term sickness absence impacted on your ability to recruit and retain staff? What strategies have you implemented to address long-term sickness absence? Are there any sector or occupation-specific drivers, such as customer-facing roles and being exposed at work to illnesses? And we've seen this during the pandemic. And how has long-term sickness absence impacted workforce planning and skills development in the business? And for education and training providers and funders, are there any initiatives that could be promoted through Cambridgeshire and Peterborough level partnerships to address this? And are economic development strategies sufficiently accounting for the difficulties in filling job vacancies due to long-term sickness, with strategies generally focusing on job creation rather than measures to increase the labour supply? So depression, bad nerves and anxiety is the top reason for economic long-term sickness, absence and economic activity. This is followed by problems with legs or feet, problems with the back or neck, mental illness, problems with arms or hands, heart, blood or circulation, other health conditions, chest or breathing problems, digestive problems and diabetes. But depression and anxiety is by far the biggest reason for long-term sickness absence as a reason for economic inactivity.
Thanks. And a comment about whether this is something we can gain insight from further or deeper engagement with Job Centre Plus. Is that something that we can do?
I think we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when sort of engaging, we're kind of always seeking to see what sort of data sets that people might have. Mindful, obviously, with the it's an aspect we're exploring to obviously try and understand with the wider LSIP recommendations. It's not about creating a new LSIP, but obviously looking at what we had and starting to look at whether or not there are factors that might be impacting or changing any of the recommendations, or I guess the landscape that was in place when we developed the report in May of last year. So yeah, absolutely, sort of any sort of intelligence from key stakeholders like that we can take on to understand that more, where we need to dive deeper. It's that sort of content that I think we'll be looking to pick up. But keen to see if anybody else has any insights on that.
Yeah, and ditto as well, Adeline, for our partners in the health sector. It's interesting, isn't it? The health sector, it's got a vast amount of information, as we know from having worked with that sector in the past. So there's a lot of information there. So at the level at which it's possible to share insights, given the nature of the data, we'll definitely want to check in with the analysts working with the NHS and other organisations as well. So yeah, that's a good shout, and we'll do with that. Adeline, there's a comment there about working with the Workwell programme.
So that's one that I would just have to check in with other colleagues as far as how engaged we are with that. But it's certainly something happy to sort of pick up with you on, Kieran, as far as if we're not already linked in with that, as far as understanding how that can help support and sort of share additional insights. If you think that's something that might be able to, there might be insights we can collect there. I'll follow up with you after the session on that one.
Thanks. And just before we move on, can I just pick up the one or two comments as well, just from the previous slide about teacher shortages, and about kind of the impact this might have on the availability of specialists or subject matter experts in teaching roles. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good observation. We'll definitely take that away. And you know, the impact of non-specialist teaching specialist subjects, absolutely. That's something that we need to take on board. Okay, so if I move on to the next one, which is the decline in jobs across the area for priority sectors. So it's a bit of a mixed picture here, but what we do see is several thousand fewer jobs, 5,000 fewer jobs in advanced manufacturing and materials and digital and IT, which has more than offset the growth in jobs across agri-tech and life sciences, those other priority sectors. We know from the data that this is concentrated in certain occupational areas, such as engineering design activities, computer programs, consultancy, and related activities. So we know that there are kind of skill sets or occupational clusters within those sectors that have seen declining numbers. But again, you can only learn so much from those raw figures. We need to have a better understanding of how that reflects broader trends within those sectors and what we can draw from that. And there's also the question as well about how it is that the data would suggest that there might be lesser churn in the job. So the job postings that we see on job sites, some of those are new, of course, but some of them are advertising existing roles. So some evidence that we're seeing, less churn in and out of companies within digital IT. Why is that? What are the factors behind it? We'd love to know more about that. So the sort of questions for employers would be, let us try and understand some of those job trends in a bit more detail. What does that mean for any changing skills needs in the priority sectors? And this company churn point is an interesting one we'd like to understand a bit better. In terms of our partners and the sort of things we'd like to explore with them, it'd be great to talk about in economic development terms, what actions economic development bodies or the combined authority, local government are taking to unlock jobs growth in priority sectors. So that could be the development of key sites and facilities. It'd be great to understand how inward investment queries are mapping onto priority sectors, and whether there are any interesting trends that are being observed there. So those are sort of the key questions, I think. But I'm going to leave it there and invite comment. So we've got job declines in tech explained by recent economic uncertainty, in some cases redundancies, digital talent being more affordable, broad, outsourcing, so on. So thanks for your contribution. We'll take that into account. Another comment about advice about teacher shortages, I think, and careers advice. Any others relating to those priority sectors, and any sort of observations that you may have had on dealing with those? No? Okay, then I shall move us on to talk about labour market exclusion and poor outcomes for young people in Finland. Hannah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've touched on some of the disadvantage experienced in Finland. So employment in Finland has fallen to its lowest rate for 11 years. Inactivity is at its highest rate for 12 years. The number of jobs has fallen, and the size of the working age population has fallen. And this decline in the working age population since 2017 has been driven by a fall in the number of 18 to 24-year-olds, so likely due to young people leaving the area for education and employment opportunities. So this shrinking labour pool is likely to be a driver of recruitment difficulties in the area, and so employers in Finland are taking longer to fill their vacancies than any other area in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And with regard to education, so outcomes for young people continue to be poor. We've mentioned that Finland has some of the lowest attainment rates for young people across all local authorities in England. So we'd like to get more information from employers and education providers to develop skills and training-based responses to employment outcomes and to better understand employers' recruitment difficulties in the area. So questions for employers. So do you see a disconnect between young people's qualifications and local job requirements in Finland? What barriers do you face to attracting talent to Finland compared to other areas? And how can we improve alignment between education and training and employer needs in Finland? And for education training providers and funders in Finland, what are the barriers preventing young people from entering the workforce and also progressing in education? So we've spoken to others such as the North Cambridgeshire Training Centre, who've talked about sort of lack of public transport being a barrier to progressing in education, particularly for disadvantaged young people in Finland. How can we strengthen collaboration between education providers, businesses and policymakers to address skills gaps in the area? Can we improve the attractiveness of Finland for potential employees, especially young people? Can we retain them in the area? And how can we use current funding and delivery mechanisms to better address skills mismatch for jobs in the area?
Thank you, Hannah. Any thoughts, anybody, about if there's any colleagues on the call who are working in Finland? It'd be great to get your perspective on some of those issues. But yeah, I think some of the metrics in the report, really bear out, that there are some issues we need to explore in more depth related specifically to Finland. I shall move us on to the next area, forward priority for Insight, which is the kind of worrying decline in employer training, especially for instruction in new technology. Again, it's a bit counterintuitive. We're told that the world is changing faster than it ever has before, and technology is outstripping us all. But why is that not leading then to, increased rates of training, levels of training in the instruction of that new technology? So what we want to know, working with employers, is what are the big barriers that they face to investing more in training, especially the rollout of new tech? How important are the respective drivers for their decision making? Is it costs, a time out of the workplace, knowledge barriers, and particularly when we're dealing with the pace of change in technology in particular? It'd be good to understand how they perceive the effectiveness of some online training options compared to other types of training too. Which model of delivery do they normally use, and how is this changing? And then for education and training providers, our partners there, we'd like to sort of understand, I think, from your perspective, how can we use forthcoming Insight projects like the report that we're doing to unpack barriers to employer investment in training for new technologies? And also just how do they see it from their perspective? What changes are you making? How are you kind of designing new courses and accounting for the pace of change? And then specifically on apprentice numbers within the report, we reported that the increase there was skewed towards higher level apprenticeship. So the type of apprenticeship training that is more common with senior level management. How does that look from your perspective? Is that still the case now? Has there been any change over the past year? And how do they see it changing in the future? So those are some of the questions, I think, for that. It'd be great to get your thoughts if you have any comments or questions. No? Okay. Then I will move us on. Hannah?
Okay, yeah. So this one on digital skills. So the likely impact of digital skills demand from recent technological developments. So we've given an overview of the kind of main skills in demand across Cambridge and Peterborough. So over the past 5 years, programming, software development and engineering are the top rated digital skills in Cambridge, and also they accounted for the largest number of job postings across the whole region. There are different trends going on across different local authority areas. So Cambridge saw the slowest growth in digital employment, well behind East Cambridge and Finland. And digital skills listed in job postings in kind of this area are more orientated to sort of basic skills, and those related to kind of manufacturing related and engineering related occupations such as computer numeric control and computer aided design. So we'd like to understand more about how the market for digital skills is evolving and how recent developments such as increased use of AI has impacted workforce planning, emerging roles and competencies. So questions for employers: which emerging digital skills are becoming increasingly important for you? And how do you see AI impacting skills required by your business? and for education, training providers and funders. So how are Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's strategies responding to the recent rise and rapid uptake of AI by business? And does the sector strategy for digital need to be updated? So it was produced in 2019, pre-pandemic, and the world's moved on in terms of digital at least quite a bit since then. How are business support programs supporting the uptake of digital technology? And are forward priorities for skills funding being reshaped to account for these big differences in digital skills demand across the different districts in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough?
Thanks. And I should also just point out that this presentation was written before the change of government came into effect at the end of last week. So, of course, read those points broadly as new kind of strategies and plans and industrial strategy requirements on local areas are known over the coming weeks and months. These are the sorts of things that we'd like to, questions we'd like to ask as those things are being developed. We have a comment from some organisations are actively gifting their spare apprenticeship levy to support businesses who recruit learners furthest away from employment, which is encouraging. Thanks for that, Linda. I don't know, Adeline, if you want to comment at this point, but of course, as a chamber network, I know there's been quite a lot of activity at the national level to try and make it a bit easier for some of that transfer to take place between different employers and make it a bit easier for levy resources to move around the system where it's most needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's examples of sort of best practice that we're kind of, the LSIP is really designed to help sort of support and capitalise on identifying where things are working well and how we can not only as a sort of employer representative body promote more of that sort of happening and facilitated by stakeholders and employers themselves, but also raising awareness with employers about the sort of impact and the options available to them. So definitely the type of sort of solutions that we're trying to sort of capture. So if there are any other sort of pieces like that you want to sort of feed in as examples of things that have worked, you know, that's our opportunity to help kind of make sure that narrative is amplified across the region, and that other stakeholders, we're kind of able to sort of raise and understand what is working and what isn't as far as that sort of, let's say, region-wide approach to the solutions goes.
Thanks, Adeline. Any other thoughts on that or other slides? If not, I'll move on and we can pick up as we go. So another kind of area of insight forward priority is around the detailed requirements for the increased demand for green skills. So we know that demand for employees for green skills has increased sharply over the last few years. And at present, around 1 in 6 people work in occupations that are likely to be in increased demand due to greening, and 1 in 7 are in occupational groups that could see significant changes to their working requirements, or where entirely new or renewed roles could be created. So this is an area of the labour market, an area of the economy where there's some big structural changes coming down the track, and indeed are already playing out. So the Chamber is going to be working closely with employees to better understand this in the future. But I suppose the question that we have working with employers is, you know, what specific green skills are going to be most critical for your operations in the future? Are they finding it difficult to find qualified candidates in the areas that are relevant to them? And are they aware of the training programs that are already available to help workforce develop the green skills they need? And if they have engaged with them, do they have a view on them and how they should evolve in the future as the economy evolves to become more green? Working with our education and training providers, it'd be good to hear more from you about how things look from your hilltop in terms of where is the demand coming from? What are the most in-demand green skills training that you're seeing? And yeah, discussing how we can better work together to identify these kind of rapidly emerging changes within this part of the economy, and how we can work to prioritise the provision against the gaps as we understand them. So that's that. Any questions about the evolving demand for green skills and kind of understanding that and overcoming them, overcoming the skills gaps. No? Okay, I'll move us on. Hannah, care workers?
Yeah, okay, so finally the shortage of care workers. So Cambridge and Peterborough has an ageing population, like most areas of England, and between 2020 and 2035, 30,000 additional people will be required to fill caring personal service occupations, and this is the second highest forecast employment requirement of all occupations. But as we've shown already today, recruitment difficulties are already highest for this occupational group. So we'd like to understand how employers, particularly care employers, are responding to these recruitment difficulties, what impact they're experiencing of increased recruitment difficulties, and to develop responses to ensure that future employment demand can be met. So some questions for care sector employers. Perhaps worth noting here that some of the biggest players in the jobs market in some areas are care employers. So in Finland, over the past 5 years, 3 of the 5 biggest recruiters have been care companies. In South Cambridgeshire, over the past 6 months, 3 of the 5 biggest recruiters have been care companies or a care charity as well. So questions for those care employers: what are the biggest challenges you face in attracting and retaining care workers? How are staff shortages impacting your ability to deliver your services, and what strategies have you implemented to address worker shortages in your organisation? Are you trying to increase wages, trying to increase other benefits? I spoke to a care company in Scotland earlier this year as part of another project, and they were setting up their own training academy to try and address some of the recruitment difficulties they were experiencing and try and increase their kind of labour pool. And some questions for education training providers and funders. So how are economic development strategies responding to the difficulties faced in the care sector? It's not currently recognised as a priority sector for the area, but should we perhaps be giving it a bit more attention, given its importance for the local labour market and likely growth over the next decade or more?
Thanks, Hannah. I should say also from my experience working on other projects, one of the challenges that I know the care sector faces is the ability to leverage new technology in the service of labour efficiency, because you have, mandatory staffing ratios. It's a very heavily regulated sector for obvious reasons. It has to be. So it perhaps, compared to some other sectors that we've talked about today, like manufacturing and others, introducing new ways of working is a little bit more complex potentially than in some other sectors. So we'd like to understand those issues a bit more and unpack that in future insight work, basically. That brings us to the end of our presentation. I know that's a lot to go through, a lot of detail to ingest, and as I say, there'll be plenty of time after to go back through the slides, and if you see anything that really kind of jumps out at you that perhaps didn't jump out at you today, or from some of the slides that we skipped over in the interest of time, happy to engage on the detail of those. So Adeline, I think this is the point I pass back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just echoing what Mike's just said. I think this needs to be an ongoing conversation, and that's part of what the LSIP is supposed to be, as opposed to just a plan that sort of gets forgotten. We have that ongoing role as ERB to continue to talk about the employer challenges that were highlighted, to continue to try and get the focus on making sure that action's taken, but also, as I say, that we're evolving and continuing to stay up to date with the latest sort of insights on what the challenges are. So as I said, these conversations will continue as the sort of labour market and the analysis is refreshed periodically. We'll be arranging sessions like this to talk you through what's new, obviously incorporating where we're able to get insights that are sent to us directly as well in more detail or examples. We can obviously make sure they're in a sort of iterative way fed into this process. So the next one is on the 9th of September, and we've put a link in the chat already, but do feel free to, as I say, follow up with us with additional insights once you've had a chance to digest more, and we'll keep you updated on the next steps from the LSIP on our website, ongoing conversations that I know we're having with many of you, and with the production of our annual report, which should be happening this month as well. But any questions, feel free to get in touch with us. The LSIP mailing list is lsip@camcci.co.uk, but I'm sure many of you will have direct contact details for various members of the team as well. And I just want to thank you for coming along and listening. As I said, we'll share the content that we've been referencing after the session, and hope to see a lot of you at the next one.